My name is Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain. I'm the former General Officer Commanding of the 15 Corps, which is located at Srinagar, responsible for the defense and the management of security of the Kashmir Valley. 5th of August 2019, when the Indian government abrogated Article 370, republished the maps of Jammu and Kashmir, reclaiming the entire territories of Jammu and Kashmir, which had been actually reiterated in the 1994 parliamentary resolution of both houses of parliament, that the entire territories of Jammu and Kashmir belong to India. But the actual publication of maps was done only on the 1st of October 2019. This was the final nail, perhaps, which sent home the message that India's tolerance of what was happening within its borders in this manner was no longer existent, and that it would proactively handle these issues to an Indian strategic advantage. Perhaps this message was the series of events led to a creation of a perception in the mind of the PLA leadership, the Chinese leadership, that allowed to grow like this, despite the friendship between China and India, simply allowed to progress like this, India would actually become a threat to China. And therefore, in 2020, given what happened, the entire world under duress of the pandemic commencing in the month of January, February, India being hit by it in March, it's difficult not to be tempted to link the events of what happened in Ladakh with the downturn in the Indian economy due to the pandemic. All these events somehow came to a head, and in the month of April, May, you found the moves of the PLA taking place in Ladakh, the conversion of a benign exercise with troops 100, 200 kilometers in depth being suddenly converted to a military maneuver, ending up right there at the line of actual control. It's important to remember, even as we are looking at Ladakh 2020, that the build-up of the PLA as the fourth priority among the four modernizations had brought the PLA up to a very high level of technical capability and modernization through a process of transformation. Alongside the development of capability of the PLA itself, you also had a tremendous enhancement of infrastructure in the border areas. China had invested tremendously in railway, connecting up Beijing with Lhasa, and subsequently of late, connecting up Lhasa to all the border areas, including with the fast trains. The ability of the PLA to mobilize its forces, to bring them to the battle zone, to the concentration areas along the border, improved from something about 2 seasons. It used to take 2 seasons for the PLA to actually build up itself to be in a position to launch operations against India. It improved this capability to something like 2 weeks to a month. And perhaps even it's reducing by the day. A tremendous amount of investment of infrastructure. Besides 2016, in February 2016, China adopted the Theater Command System, aping the United States with its vast borders, vast regions. It brought the elements of war fighting, the PLA Army, Navy and the Air Force and all the assets under a single command and control under the theaterized system. And this perhaps gave it a bit of an impetus in terms of its overall military confidence. Perhaps 2020 was also a time when the Chinese wanted to test out the theater command system in a more proactive manner, perhaps even building up situations and environment and inviting response from the senior leadership. So it's not easy to put a finger to what exactly was the reason in 2020, in the month of April, May, as to why the Chinese decided to coerce India. A total strength of about 50,000 troops were brought into the eastern Ladakh along certain areas of the line of actual control, commencing from the north, in the area of Depsang, in the area of the Galwan River Valley, the Gojra area, the Pangong Tso, North Pangong Tso, the areas which is called the Fingers Complex. These are prime areas where this deployment had taken place. I think for the non-military mind, it's important to know what can 50,000 troops do from an offensive angle. In high altitude terrain, the normal ratio of troops to capture territory, which means dominating heights, is essentially 9:1, which means 50,000 troops put together roughly could capture an area which was held by about 5,000 troops, which means that approximately a brigade-sized area held by the Indian Army could possibly be the objective of the quantum of troops which were brought into Ladakh. But that is not going to achieve anything. If areas have to be captured, it has to be over a larger frontage. If it has to be a meaningful threat, then if territory has to be captured, then it has to be over a large front, which will invite an Indian response, an Indian dispersed response to those areas where the application of the PLA is taking place. So did China just want to achieve this much with 50,000 troops to actually activate a single area? I think most military minds will agree that the intent of crossing the line of actual control perhaps did not exist. The idea was intimidation. The idea was coercion. The idea was sending home a larger message to the government of India, to the world at large, that China would take military action to safeguard its interests, and that any nation which considered itself to be rising, which could be a threat to China in the future, it needed to think twice before undertaking any kind of a mission against the Chinese armed forces. I think this was very, very clear from the manner in which these operations in the month of April, May, June panned out. Now, it's very important to see that while you had this standoff taking place, it was obvious that when troops were virtually eyeball to eyeball, as they are on the line of control in the Kashmir Valley or in the Jammu region against the Pakistan Army, there would be tremendous scope for mistakes, for triggers, for awkward actions between the troops. And that's exactly what happened on the 15th of June 2020, 10 days after an agreement between the commanders, corps commander level officers of the two sides having met and decided to carry out disengagement. And it's this process of disengagement and the non-existence of any laid down rules of engagement which ultimately led to a situation such as what happened at Galwan, in which very brave soldiers of the Indian Army, 16 Bihar, under their commanding officer, Colonel Babu, Mahavir Chakra, went across essentially to determine whether the disengagement process by which the PLA was to withdraw from a certain area had actually taken place or not. And that led to a clash, a very awkward kind of a clash, which led to loss of lives. Galwan actually was the first exchange of blows. Not really the first, but a series of exchanges had taken place, but the first loss of lives that took place on the line of actual control between India and China in 45 years. And that obviously got the temperatures rising. All the negotiations, engagement of the senior commanders continued to take place, but both sides ensured build-up. The Indian build-up was rapid. For 14 Corps, which controls the Indian side, did not have that many troops to be able to deploy on the line of actual control. It also looks after the area of Kargil. It also looks after the area of Siachen. So the number of troops which were available to actually deploy in the LAC area were very limited. And therefore, the important decision was taken to induct reserves to Ladakh. Now one should know, Ladakh is not, first of all, it's not a desert area. It's not an area where you have railways and you have railroads and tracks and multiple airfields. Everything is limited. A vehicle which moves from Pathankot to Ladakh with ammunition or with fuel to stock the Ladakh sector normally takes 10 days to turn around. So that is the quantum of transport resources which are required. And the public needs to know that if you are deploying 30 to 40,000 troops into the Ladakh sector, what it really means is not just the movement of the troops, but it also involves the movement of stocks, which means the rations, fuel, ammunition, creation of habitat, because when the winter comes, temperatures fall to minus 40 degrees centigrade. So the construction of habitat, a tremendous amount of heating resources which have to be inducted into that area. The Air Force has to build up there and build up its own ammunition to an extent. So the resource management is something mind-boggling in terms of challenges. And it's to the credit of the Indian Armed Forces, the kind of cooperation between the Indian Air Force and the Indian Army, which ensured a rapid movement of these resources into Ladakh, into just two airfields, the Thois airfield and the Leh airfield. And it's not just the movement of stocks into Leh, you have to move those stocks across the Ladakh range, which is 18 to 20,000 feet high. You have the highest motorable passes of the world, the Changla Pass and the Khardungla Pass, which exist on the Ladakh range, linking up the Shyok Valley on the other side. These were huge challenges which mostly the public will be unaware of. But what the Indian Armed Forces achieved, what the nation achieved, was that in 2 months' time, we had mirror deployment, which means the kind of deployment which the PLA had on the line of actual control in these given areas of Gujarat, Depsang, Galwan, Pangong Tso, India had a similar deployment. Once that similar deployment was achieved, the question which was being asked by a lot of people was that if the Chinese have transgressed, why can't a quid pro quo be done by the Indian Army to similarly transgress? And that's exactly what happened on the night of 29th, 30th August 2020, where on the southern banks of the Pangong Tso, in an area called the Kailash Range, 7 points were selected which are on our side of the perception of the line of actual control. They were not on the Chinese side. We went and occupied those areas. Those were unoccupied areas since 1962. They were never occupied. We occupied those areas and therefore reversed the advantage. We acquired the tactical operational advantage on the South Pangong Tso, along the Kailash Range, overlooking a place called the Spangur Gap. and the Pangong Tso lake, next to which is the headquarters of the PLA, which controls the entire operations in eastern Ladakh. This was a major achievement, the domination of that headquarters and the occupation of this piece of territory on our side of the line of actual control. The response from the Chinese side was in a fairly agitated way. A lot of information warfare was put out. A lot of intimidation was done by movement of patrols and large bodies of troops to those sites, perhaps intimating, coercing us to withdraw. But the Indian Army held its ground. We did not fire. There was no exchange of fire. And that's how, to a very great extent, the advantage which had been gained in the North Pangong Tso in particular was neutralized by the quid pro quo operations in the Kailash Range. It's good to kill this aspect at this stage itself, that in 2021, when the agreement to disengage took place, the Chinese accepted the disengagement or the withdrawal from the Fingers complex, from the Finger 4 to Finger 8, in exchange for an Indian withdrawal from the 7 points on the Kailash Range. A lot of people have asked this question as to why we could not have ensured the withdrawal of the Chinese from the Depsang Plains or occupation in any other areas such as the Gojra area. And our response normally to this has been that perhaps the quid pro quo operation, what it achieved on the Kailash Range area in the South Pangong Tso, actually was sufficient to be able to message China about what it had achieved on the north bank of the Pangong Tso. And since Depsang was well displaced from that area, perhaps the operational tactical effect of that to force a withdrawal in the Depsang area could not be achieved. I think the Indian Army had achieved a tremendous amount by carrying out the QPQ operation, the quid pro quo operation, and the agreement to withdraw from the north bank from the Fingers complex was a major achievement for the Indian side. Coming back to the situation in the month of June, July, August, perhaps even September 2020, since it seemed quite clear that the Chinese had not come with the intent of war fighting, large-scale military operations, what was definitely very clear was that they wished to achieve an advantage in terms, a technical advantage in terms of resources. Therefore, since then and ongoing till now, the PLA has been involved in large-scale deployment of missiles and rockets, in the construction of missile and rocket bases all along in the Tibetan mainland, in the hinterland. There's no doubt the Chinese concept of war, besides information warfare and things like that, believes very strongly in the use of missiles and rocketry. The advantage which India faced was in the domain of air power, with many of our airfields located down below at heights of 2,000 to 3,000 feet above sea level, while most of the Chinese, or almost all the Chinese airfields located in high altitude desert areas of 11,000 feet and above, the capability of carriage of munitions by those aircraft which were deployed in the high altitude areas was limited. This was an advantage for India because our aircraft could actually take off with full munition strength. And therefore, the battles in the air would be virtually unequal battles. The Chinese have attempted to offset this advantage to a great extent by the deployment of the S-400 in the eastern Ladakh and the depth areas beyond eastern Ladakh in the Aksai area to attempt to neutralize this advantage that the Indian Air Force has against the PLA Air Force. So, all in all, the Indian response, may I say, because the intimidation and the trigger for all this came from the PLA, from the Chinese side, the Indian response was measured diplomatically and militarily, and it was correct. Diplomatically, we did not lose our balance. India ensured that it went to the extent of not even naming China as far as the situation in Ladakh, the way it was obtaining. We kept all our options open. We deployed, in case of a contingency, in the worst case contingency, deployed sufficient troops, not only in Ladakh, but also in other areas along the Himalayan region. And we continued to play ball diplomatically with much of the world. And to a very great extent, most of the world backed India with what was happening in Ladakh, particularly at a time when the pandemic was at its height. What we have to remember is that after a year of the standoff, the fact that the Indian Army could weather a full winter in a not fully prepared mode, I think sent the message home very clearly that India or the Indian Army of 2020, 2021 was not the same as what the Chinese had contested in 1962. So the message was very clear that nothing could be achieved by conducting this kind of intimidation, this kind of coercion, or anything beyond this involving war fighting. Everything could be done through diplomacy, everything could be done through engagement. 10 rounds of talks have taken place at the theatre level, the corps commanders level, in which various aspects have been discussed. A stand down was finally accepted. The Chinese did dismantle all what they had occupied in the areas of the Pangong Tso, North Pangong Tso, moved back immediately. A lot depends on subsequent validation of the areas which had been occupied. We also agreed to withdraw from the heights of the Kailash Range which had been occupied by us, although all these heights actually fall within the territory of our perception of the line of actual control. So as such, peace does prevail today in Ladakh, but it's a tenuous peace. And this can, with the availability of troops, with the manner in which the line of actual control has been virtually converted to some extent to the line of control, manned line of control, tensions continue to prevail, and therefore triggers could take place anywhere which could lead to some kind of turbulent exchanges along the line of actual control. Having kept this aspect in mind, on the diplomatic side, military diplomatic side, I would say, or strategic diplomatic side, India has continued to engage very strongly with the United States, with Japan, with Australia. And the quadrilateral of nations, the process of which began in 2007, appears to be progressing towards some kind of a finality. The United States is intending to shift its focus of operations from the Middle East, where it has been drawn into because of 9/11, because of the Afghanistan situation, because of what happened in the Iraq war. Now it wishes to shift focus and create the pivot to Asia, in Asia itself. It wants to do the containment of China, the rise of China, the not so peaceful rise of China. It wishes to carry out the containment in a completely new policy, in a completely new domain of the Indo-Pacific, in which India forms a very, very important part. The quadrilateral of nations, which is not considered as a NATO of the East yet, is emerging as a strategic partnership between four nations at the moment with greater understanding. With the coming of the Biden administration, no change has taken place in the policies that the United States was following under the Trump administration, and the progress towards the Quad seems to be taking place in an effective manner. The most important aspect here is the maritime zone. The navies of the four nations have exercised with each other, and the potential of the quadrilateral of nations enhancing to Quad Plus with the inclusion of the French, perhaps the Vietnam and other countries, the potential always remains live. But at the end, it's very important to say that while the PLA and China decided not to engage in war fighting, but only coercion and intimidation, the actual methodology which China used against India was what is called hybrid war. Because it used many other domains to mix along with the military domain, which was only restricted to the aspect of intimidation. These domains were the economic domain, gray zone, that is to an extent extending into the political areas, and very, very importantly, the cyber domain. The cyber domain, and we got a taste of it, perhaps not confirmed, in Mumbai, when the Mumbai power grid tripped and was off for quite some time. It is generally appreciated that it was a cyber effort from China, which was a warning which had been issued to India. So there are different domains which can be identified in which China engages, particularly the area of cyber, economic, gray zone warfare, and information warfare. These are the domains in which India has to strengthen itself. We have now progressed into a situation where we have developed a strategic cyber agency with the Indian Armed Forces. We have a better understanding of hybrid warfare over the last few years. We are looking at the economic domain in terms of where we can be actually intimidated and hit hard. And we are developing the means of countering information warfare and taking it to the adversaries. But much more needs to be done. In all this, and lastly, it's so important that what we concluded right at the beginning of this talk, the aspect of maritime domain being the important domain for India, we need to start investing much more in the Indian Navy, and as a whole invest much more perhaps in the development and transformation of the Indian Armed Forces. If we mean to be an effective partner in the Quad, if we intend to remain a strong player in the international strategic environment, without this investment, perhaps India may not be able to achieve its aims. Thank you very much.